Strip Club Video with Danny Myers, Dane Hansen, and Jeff Gerald starts now.
Strip Club Video. I am Danny Myers. We have Jeff Gerald with us. No Dane Hansen again. Where'd he go? And we have got a very, very special guest with us here today. She is a government consultant. She is the CEO at Empowerment Enterprises Incorporated and a co-founder of Coast and does an amazing job with all the legal issues, or a lot of the legal issues that we face in the strip club industry. Angelina Spencer, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Danny. I'm happy to be here. Hope you're doing well too.
We're doing great. We're gonna the topic we want to talk about is keeping our entertainers safe online, because a lot of them do a lot of things online. We want to keep them safe. But before we go on to today's topic, Jeb and I we want to recap a little bit from last week's show. Last week we had Jimmy Ricard on the show. He is from Bucks, regional manager of Bucks in Texas, and they passed this ridiculous law that says that if you're going to work or in some way get money out of the strip club industry, then you have to be 21 or up. They had to fire all their people. And Angelina, you said that bill came across your desk and you were actually looking at it. You had some thoughts on that?
I did. So we initially found the bill. What ACE National does, we have something called legislative bill tracking. So we keep track of any legislation that can potentially either negatively or positively impact the industry. And when I saw that legislation, I was concerned because, one, it does nothing to help save trafficking victims, if you will. If anything, it could hurt and drive people underground. But the other thing that I was thinking about was, if you're going to tell grown women who make a choice to dance in a club that they are now doing something illegal and can no longer do that, and you don't provide them with any economic or job growth opportunities, then perhaps we should consider having, not requiring young men to register for selective service due to the dangers that are inherent with potential war. So those are just some of my thoughts on that type of legislation. I think the cause to combat sex trafficking is good, but I think the knee-jerk reactions that are behind it are not so good.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
For those of you watching this right now, if you did not get a chance to watch that show, all of our strip club video shows can be found at my website, which is djdannymyers.com. So check that one out. But Angelina, what I want to talk to you today about is these modeling agencies, these photographers, websites that are luring our young girls into possible sex trafficking. And every once in a while you see these things, and I hear my girls talk about, hey, I got approached by this photographer and they want me to do a photo session. And, some of them are legit. You've got the ones that say, hey, I want to pay you, $3,000 to fly out here to Los Angeles and meet with my producers and stuff like this. And those get a little on the sketchy side. And we've got the modeling agencies, we've got the photographers. So what have you seen out there from where you're looking at from the legal side, some of the things that have been going on along that subject?
Oh my gosh, where do I start? So just to be perfectly clear for all of our listeners, some of the things that I'm going to share with you don't always come out of a club. So I need to make sure that everyone knows this. These are things that I work with. So I've worked with groups like our Underground Rescue, and I was just asked to join a board of Co-Action, which is a national anti-human trafficking group. And so some of this comes from what I've seen or dealt with or heard or been exposed to that either does or does not include clubs, but includes those asks, if you will, for modeling. So are we all clear on that as we move forward? Yeah. Because I just don't want someone listening to say, oh, see, it happens in the clubs all the time. And it's all the clubs are just purveyors of this. And that's not necessarily true. So some of the things that we see are just what you said, Danny, with regard to photographers that come out, they all of a sudden they show up. And a lot of times, and I know when I was a dancer, this happened a couple of times where somebody would show up at a club and they would say, wow, and they'd lay the compliments on thick and say, wow, you could you could model, you could do lingerie modeling, you could do, and the big one was always, and it's a bit obsolete now, and I'm dating myself too, but was always, here's my card, I could get you into Playboy. Or I can get you in a penthouse. You could be a penthouse pet or a Playboy bunny. And and now with OnlyFans, it's a little different with social media, because I think that a lot of ways that women can be a lot safer now, but it's pretty common sense to say, be careful. Although when you're first getting into this industry and maybe you're new to it, you really have to do your due diligence. And I know, Danny, we talked off air about this, but I think one of the things that any dancer could do is look at, ask around, like, who's a photographer in the industry? Because what we discussed last week was the fact that at the end of the day, our industry is pretty small. And it's pretty community oriented, and we become like family. And there are a number of very legitimate and very good photographers in this industry that I'm sure you could share if you wanted to with your listeners. But that's one thing that we see are the guys that go in the clubs, and they may look legit, they may have a card. Unfortunate incidences have happened where a young lady will go to, she is drawn by promises of money and fame, and she shows up, and the next thing you know, she's had something. Here's a drink, here's some champagne to make yourself feel comfortable. It's quite common to loosen somebody up with champagne in order to do videos or photography. It's when something gets slipped in there and she doesn't remember what happens. You have to be very careful. The other thing I'd say is, if you're going to do this, take somebody with you that you feel comfortable with. Don't ever go alone. And again, that all goes back to common sense type of stuff, or at least at a minimum, let somebody know where you're going. Take a picture of that card, send it to a few friends, or maybe even, look up this guy's credentials, because I would think that most legitimate photographers would have, they'd have a portfolio. Ask to see their portfolio. Nothing wrong with that. So
is there something like the BBB for them? Is there a list of registered, reputable photographers that kind of network and produce their way that way, or is it kind of a fly by night? You have to know individually their credentials.
I would assume, I don't know of that personally, but that's a great question. I would assume that it's just like trade associations, right? So just like the adult clubs have a trade association, I would assume that so too do photographers. However, that doesn't mean that everyone belongs to one. So, that's something I would say any photographer that's worth their weight in credibility would be online somewhere. They'd have a portfolio and a presence somewhere. Yeah.
Well, I really like what you just said a little bit ago about, when you're getting ready to show up, call your friend, tell them where you're at, tell them what address you're at, and let them know. I mean, you can do that right in front of them. So that way, if they are sketchy, then all of a sudden, well, this isn't going to work out and we'll see you later.
Right.
Kind of a thing. And if they're on the legit, they probably won't mind you telling your friend the address that you're doing this photo shoot at. So,
that's right. That's right.
And good point. Jeb,
yeah.
you had an interesting question about sex workers.
Well, you kind of be on the spot there. I'm still on track with the last conversation. I'm curious if the United States government has started working on any kind of phrasing or wording for the legitimizing of sex work. Like I see a change, worldwide. I do a lot of traveling all over the world, and the red light districts are no longer in one zone. It's a bit more nationalized in a lot of places across the world, and I see a trend coming that way slowly. I know the blue laws will fight till the end on this, but I'm wondering if the government has already started preparing.
In a way they have, but not to the extent, not to the extent that you might think. So everyone, do you know what an NGO is? Are you aware what
Yes.
a non-governmental? Okay.
Right.
Non-governmental organizations are charity, and this is for listeners. They're usually charity organizations, and they can apply for federal grants. So one of the things they love to do is use strip clubs as their model as the purveyors of sex trafficking. So I doubt very much that the nomenclature will change. However, there's some interesting things going on. I was asked to take part, so I met with the Directorate of Science and Technology at the Department of Homeland Security. I was asked by a private contractor, because in addition to my ACE work, as you know, I have Empowerment Enterprises, which is a governmental consulting firm. So I was asked to take part in a foundational effort on human trafficking and to look at the strip club side of it. And that was based on a paper that I wrote where I aggregated all of the uniform crime reporting stats. And I'm going somewhere with this, and it's really interesting. I aggregated all of the FBI's uniform crime reporting stats, and they actually look at crime reporting for sex trafficking dating all the way back to 2013. So when we aggregate all of that data, what we discovered was that sex trafficking within strip clubs is less than 1% of the US problem for sex trafficking, which NGOs don't want to hear that, because now you've just you've ruined their ability to get resources from the federal government to the tune of millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And they will argue with you to the nth degree. So, and then they will say, no, that's bunk. Your evidence is bunk, which, by the way, that paper did go in as evidence for a case in Georgia for strip clubs. The lawyers used it as Exhibit A. So when we look at that, and when I'm questioned about that, if I'm put under a deposition or something, or asked to clarify that, and they say, for example, the lawyer said, oh, well, she works for that industry, or she defends that industry, so her data can't be right, and it can't be right. And I say, you're right. And it's like, haha, I got you. And I say, but it's not my data. It's the government's data. So if you're passing this type of legislation, you're passing it on bunk data, which means you shouldn't be passing it at all. But if my data is correct, then you shouldn't be passing it at all. So which is it? You can't have it both ways. And the judge in that case actually agreed. So that was kind of an interesting concept, but it's what you said. It's the constant battle that we will always have, because it's an easy industry to target. And there's a lot of money at play that you guys don't think about, and it has nothing to do with the reality or the facts or the evidence, and everything to do with money and votes and lots of grant money. So
there's lots of money in the fight, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Wow. It's a lot
interesting. Yeah. I really, it's funny that people on the outside think that we have so much sex trafficking in our industry, when in reality, anyone on the inside can tell you we're one of the safest places for women to be, because they're constantly being watched, supported, and cared for. We don't allow them to disappear individually into dark corners with strange men. They're constantly being watched, monitored. Who are you going home with? Are you okay? We check a lot of different things that outside the club, there's not those protections set up.
Right. And the thing you have to remember too is there isn't a politician around who is going to have a vote on record against a certain policy, because when he or she comes up for re-election, they're going to be it will be used against them. They'll say, oh, they're pro human trafficking, or they're pro sex trafficking, or they stuck up for strip clubs. So they can't. I get it. But most of this legislation too, and this is where it's a problem, is they don't understand our industry. And you're absolutely right, because a lot of people don't understand. Many of the clubs have cameras in them. Many of the clubs they are required under law to keep records on file and open to law enforcement at any time. There's 22 states that have that law. In addition to that, let's say, and I don't believe it, but let's say that the public believes, oh, club owners are not going to monitor the best interests of dancers. They're not. They're not going to monitor the best interests of their workers, because it would make no sense for them from an economic perspective to allow happy endings to take place. What happens when a guy gets a happy ending?
He doesn't come back.
He's gone.
Yeah, his money's
He's not
done.
spending money.
Mhm.
He's not spending money. Plus, in addition to that, if it's an alcohol, if this business is attached to with an alcohol license, they're not going to risk that license. It's too easy for law enforcement to come in and do their job and actually enforce the laws that are already on the books. But I always joke that we're the second most heavily regulated industry in the nation, next to nuclear power.
Wow.
So how do we as an industry let the world know that we're on the team against sex trafficking and have been since the start? I've been in this business a long time, and I've been battling pimps since the 80s. We've always been on the team the government pretends to be on. We've always been on that side where we try to protect everyone and keep everyone safe. How do we let the rest of the world know? What's the best way to,
You do it by putting a face to the industry. So is one of the things that we started back in 2009 is Club Operators Against Sex Trafficking. That is an ACE national program that was started by a former law enforcement officer who is also a club owner named Michael Ocello. And I co-founded it with him. And then we had Brad Schaefer, who's like one of the rock star attorneys for First Amendment law, also joined us in putting together a program that we actually took to federal agents. So when I was a graduate student at George Washington University in a master's program, I was trying to work on this project, and Michael said, "Hey, we need to go to DHS. The general counsel, Janet Napolitano's general counsel, wants to meet with us." And I was floored. I'm like, "You're kidding." And they said they want to hear about the program. So we went in, we were told we'd have maybe 10 minutes with a staffer, which, if you know DC, that's how things usually work. And we ended up, a freak snowstorm blew in, and we ended up having Janet Napolitano's general counsel there for an hour and a half. And she listened to the program, and then she gave us the awkward 20 seconds of silence. And then she said, "I love it. Give them what they need." And from that, Coast was kicked off into a pilot program with federal agents from Homeland Security investigations. So, and I think, Danny, you had said that you actually attended a Coast training session that Mike Ocello taught. Is that correct?
3 of them. I went to 3 of them, actually.
Oh, good.
Back to back, and I learned something new every time.
Yeah, and I do too. So I go all over the country. Well, I did pre-COVID doing these Coast meetings. I think it's so important for this industry to do those Coast meetings. And I'll tell you why, because most people are great. Most people go. Some people just are like, "Oh, I don't want to do this. And, we don't have the problem. And, oh, this is ridiculous." And it's like, no, it's not ridiculous. What you have to keep in mind is everything that goes around it, because you could be faced with legislation or an accusation or painted with a broad brush that doesn't apply to you. Mm-hmm. The people in this industry have kids, they have families. We're not some subhuman other than. We're in business. Either we're working at a club, but we're all in business for ourselves. And it makes no sense. Plus, we're not those kind of monsters. That doesn't mean that the club can't be used for a conduit for that crime, which goes back to what you were saying earlier about having to deal with pimps since the 80s. So I think the best thing that you could do is it's hard. You got to make the distinction between consensual sex or consensual exchanges and horrendous crime of sex trafficking. There's a difference there. So we don't arrest people for consensual, safe behaviors. But if someone is truly being abused, I think all of us can agree that's not someone we want on our stages, and we want to help them.
Agreed.
So, yeah.
I went to a Coast meeting in Denver. What was it? 2000? I want to say 17.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I enjoyed the meeting, got a lot from it, and then was really happy to see the amount of people in Colorado that showed up for that.
Yeah, I was too. And I think one of the surprising things, because Coast is not a pass, but I think one of the surprising things is that you have the agents are surprised, the federal agents, and it's like, wow, we actually got a really great tip out from outside of a club, and people don't want to see other people hurt, not typically or generally. Most of us have compassion, and going back, Danny, so here's some, even I, as long as I've done this, I too learned something new, but I also can be fooled. So imagine my mortification when I get a phone call, and this is all public now, but I get a phone call from a gentleman. Well, he's not a gentleman, evidently, but I get a phone call from a guy in the Wisconsin area. And he asks me and he's pushing me for a Coast. And I'm thinking, wow, and he says, yeah, we have a problem in this club, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, oh yeah, sure. So I call DC, I get the point of contact, or the POC up in Wisconsin, who's an agent, talk with her for a while. She's in, and I give her, the name of the guy, and I send her the email. Well, prior to this, the guy and I had talked about a zoning issue he was having, had nothing to do with sex trafficking. He asked me for an attorney referral on a zoning issue. But the last line of his email said something like, hey, thank you for help with my problem. Well, little did I know the guy was under investigation and is now serving like a 20-some year prison sentence for human trafficking. And that agent was absolutely convinced that I was covering, somehow aiding and abetting sex trafficking with this real trafficker. And because she thought when he put that last line in there that we were trying to pull the wool over her eyes, and it had nothing to do with that. So it was, and that is something where, he had me completely snowed. And then more of the details came out and the investigation went on, and obviously I've got nothing to hide with this. So, but it, and he, my point is the laws that are on the books worked. They did their job. A jury found this guy guilty, and he went to prison for a very long time, and I believe has to make restitution to the victims. Wow. So, yeah.
Well, let me ask you about Coast, the panels, the seminars that we all went to. I know you had to stop doing those because of COVID and things. Do you think there's a chance that they can start back up, or you'll be doing the tours? And to explain to the people that aren't familiar with this, they come out into different cities, and we all locally try to get as many people from the strip club industry to go to these. These are for owners, for managers, for entertainers, and things like that. And we try to get as many people to go to these as possible. I have gone to one in Indianapolis and two in Louisville. Like I say, all done by Michael Ocello. Haven't seen you do one yet, but is there any chance that these are coming back?
They will be coming back. So there are a couple of states that have codified Coast, one being Louisiana, and the other being the city of Houston, codified made Coast annual Coast meetings mandatory. And I believe in Louisiana, they have to do them twice a year, but it will be coming back. The issue that we seem to have is HSI, or Homeland Security Investigations, has a huge turnover rate, meaning people slide in and out of, it's just like waves, they're in and out of HSI headquarters, and they're in and out of the human trafficking unit. Then we, again, just like I talked about earlier with the grants and the NGOs, we have politics. So there are, there's you get a certain subsection of people who tend to think, we're not doing this. You're the devil. Get away.
Mhm.
We're not doing this. Which to me is a shame, because if you're really saying that you want to help combat the crime of sex trafficking, and you want to reach people, and you want awareness, and you want education, this should be a no-brainer, particularly if you think it's going on there. But we still have people that are like, no, we can't, we don't want any kumbaya moments with this industry. Then we have the other side who say, we disagree. And there's, these clubs can be an extension of intelligence for law enforcement. And, so it's a constant, and there's no black and white, Danny. It's just a constant, we're always going to face that battle too. But yes, I'm hopeful, because we've had, we've worked with state police, we've worked with the FBI. When I say worked with them, keep in mind, this is only, and I'm saying this more for your listeners because you guys are aware, but this is not to rat somebody out. This is not to get people in trouble. They don't care if, breasts are in somebody's face. They just don't want minors in the clubs, and they don't want to miss any genuine victims of sex trafficking. That's all they're concerned with. So, and they're not ICE. That's the other thing. Everyone says, oh, they're ICE, they're going to deport people. And it's like, no, that's not what they're looking for. It's not their job. They simply want to make sure that there's no victims. These are dedicated units for nothing but sex trafficking.
Mm-hmm. I will also, when we get done with this, I'll put a link to a Strip Club U episode that I did where I reported on. I took all of Michael Ansello's notes. Actually, I recorded his
channel.
Awesome. And this was a couple.
I saw that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I basically said, I basically took everything he said, but I gave him credit for it. So it's not like I'm trying to rip off his thing. But there's some great tips on that. It's on my Strip Club U channel, and I'll put a link to that show in here as well. Jeb, do you have any final questions?
I certainly appreciate all the work and effort you put into the industry, and to really keep trying to help everyone be educated and get safer. The effort is definitely felt, and we certainly appreciate it, and keep on going. Thank you.
Hey, thank you guys, and kudos to everybody, because it's not an individualized effort. It takes a team, and in this community, you guys, and showing up at Coast meetings, and you guys being diligent in your own clubs, and that cohesion that we all have as a smaller industry. Kudos to all of you, because you make it work at the end of the day.
You make me feel better. You do. I feel smart when I talk. I feel like I got smarter. I learned a lot from you. So thank you for coming on our show. And if you have anything in the future that you would like to educate our viewers on, just give me a call, and we'll bring you back on another episode. I love having you on here.
Okay, thanks, Danny. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Strip Club Video.